Hey, it's me, Izzy.
And me, Natalie.
And you're listening to the Giving Voice podcast.
Today we have a super interesting episode lined up for you as we're looking at the youth justice system and what it's like to be an SLT in youth justice.
We'll be chatting to Meg Slade and Siddiqui, two SLTs from the Hackney Youth Justice team. I had the privilege of shadowing Meg for a day when I did my placement in Hackney last March, and I also worked with Haj in a secondary school on the same placement.
Before we begin, we think it's really important to hear some of the facts around youth justice. The RCSLT has recently released a fact sheet about supporting young people in the youth justice system, and we think some of the stats are really shocking.
Over 60% of young people in justice settings have speech, language and communication needs.
Yet actually only 5% of those individuals have these needs identified before entering the youth justice system.
I think this really highlights how important the role of an SLT is, with both identifying speech, language and communication needs in the community, as well as supporting those already in the youth justice system.
Okay, let's get started.
Hi Meg, hi Haj, welcome to the podcast. It's so great to have you here with us.
Hello, thanks so much for having us.
Hi, I'm really excited to be here and thanks for having me.
We're so excited for the episode. I feel like it's a topic that so many people want to know about, whether you're interested in SLT or not. So yeah, we're really excited.
Thank you.
So Meg and Haj, you both work as SLTs within the youth justice system. It'd be great to know a bit about what inspired you to enter this line of work and how you got to your current role.
Okay, so I'll start, I guess.
Amazing.
So for me, it was, I think I've always really been fascinated by what a speech and language therapist does within the youth justice service. And because there is such a lack of exposure whilst you're a student, you have a bunch of ideas about what it's going to be like. And so curiosity was one of my biggest motivations. And then another thing that motivated me to want to work in youth justice was the demographic or the client groups that we work with are often from really underrepresented backgrounds. And, there is a lack of understanding around cultural experiences of people of different ethnicities. And being a global majority speech and language therapist, I am from a Pakistani background and I've grown up in London. I just felt like I could give a bit more, I felt like my life experiences would help me in the role. And maybe with the clients that I'm working with. So I was just curious and I felt like I had a part to play in this role. And I also have ADHD. So I was like, I want to represent. So
Amazing. That's so good. And were you able to get into the role as a newly qualified Band 5 or?
So I'm quite new to the role. I've only been working in youth justice since July of this year. So I started initially when I newly qualified as a mainstream primary school therapist. And then I moved from primary school to secondary school. And that secondary school experience really, I think, was one of the things that really supported me into stepping into youth justice. So that was my stepping stone. And then from there, a youth justice role came up and I just took a shot at it.
Amazing.
And what about you, Meg?
Well, my journey, it's weird actually. I always wanted to be a speech therapist even when I was 16, 17.
Oh, wow.
But I did really badly at school. I hated school. I probably only got 5 GCSEs maybe. Never even got a maths GCSE. I wasn't bad at school, but I hated school and I just felt really left out. And I just never felt like I really belonged there and I didn't really do that well. And then I wanted to be a speech therapist, looked it up and was like, oh, you got to be good at science. I'm out. Can't do that. Barely know anything about science. Anyway, and then I somehow went to college, went to uni and did English and creative writing. And I don't know, I kind of came into myself a little bit and used to write a lot of poetry and short stories. And I did at uni, I did this kind of project where I would go to Age UK to people who've had strokes and chat to them. And I'd write their biographies.
That's incredible.
Yeah,
That's
it was
so
really cool. And I was doing that and I was like, I'm pretty good at this. I'm pretty good at talking to old people about their experiences. No, but it was a really lovely project. And then we'd write our own story kind of alongside it.
Oh, wow.
And that was really cool. And then I worked in a bookshop for a bit. But all the time I was kind of like, I don't know, I just really like helping people, but I'm not very academic at all. But I applied for the course and somehow got into the UCL Masters.
Amazing.
I have no idea. No, but I got in, and again, those feelings of being feeling really stupid and being rejected. Kind of I felt about UCL as well, and I did feel a bit like everyone's really academic, everyone's really clever. I just always felt like I have no idea what they're talking about. And I think just scraping by, I would just get like 50s, 60s and be like, oh God, am I actually going to be a good speech therapist? But then all my placements I really enjoyed, and then I started off in a special school for a couple of years.
Oh wow.
And just loved it, and like the kids were just so great. And then I kind of always gravitated towards the like kids with behavioural problems, the ones who would like throw a chair at the window. Like, let me chat to them. And then I started at Hackney in 2020 and went into autism resource provisions, worked in a secondary. And similar to Haj, I just, really loved secondary. I just loved working with teenagers. And I just noticed all the kids I was working with were the ones always getting suspended for some reason. And it's a common theme in our role. And then I applied for a job in youth justice in Hackney and got that job. And then, last year I became the manager, so now I run the team, which is a teeny team, but nonetheless, it's a great team. And that's my journey.
No, you've had such interesting journeys, and it's amazing the reasons that brought you here as well.
Meg, could you tell us what a typical week looks like as a speech and language therapist working in youth justice?
I can. It's different. Every day is a different day. I think you came to Shadow one day. We were just in the office. So we have an office. And a lot of young people we work with aren't necessarily attending school, so they might come to the office. They might be kind of in that 16 to 18 gap where they might be going to college a couple of days a week. So we might see young people directly for an assessment or for an intervention. We've also just started a project. Well, last year we started a project going to court every week. So we now attend court and we just kind of go through the court process with young people because we did like a court audit and just discovered that it's really horrible. It's a really horrible place to go if you're a teenager and you don't know what's going on. I'm like a professional and I'm in my 30s and I was still like, whoa, this is really scary.
Yeah, and then language must be a big barrier for them in court.
Exactly, a massissive barrier. And like the words, even just saying like, oh, my learned friend, I'm like, you don't
come on, for anyone.
I'm like, what does that mean?
Exactly. And just all the language, it's a bit silly. But anyway, so we go there and we try and kind of just make them feel like a little bit less anxious, or just tell them what the process is, what's going to happen, and we just kind of give them some visuals, and we're just kind of there as well as like a visual presence for the magistrates and for the judges to be like, hey, we're speech, we have a speech therapy presence here, and I think that also reminds them that such a high prevalence of these young people have communication difficulties, right? So it's good for us to be there right at the beginning. As they're being sentenced, and we can also kind of pick up on any needs that they might have.
You made that really nice document where it's like a child-friendly version of what's going on, and it's like what happened and then what's happening next. Okay. And that's something that we fill out while we're sitting in court, listening to everything that's happening, and then we'll give it to the young person. And like every time the young person will take that paper from me, like it's never been like I've just written that and nothing's happened with it. So it's really
great, and just we work alongside youth offending practitioners who kind of like social workers, one's like a psychiatric nurse, like we've all had like kind of different careers before. And now they're that kind of like a probation worker in a sense. So that young person has been allocated that worker. But it's really interesting in court, kind of them watching us chat to the young person, because usually they'll come out of court and the probation worker will say, okay, so do you understand? They're like, yeah. Whereas we come out and I'm like, okay, so what happened in there? Can you, he's our speech therapist. Can you tell me a little bit about what happened? What are your bail conditions? And they're like, I'm not sure. I'm like, okay, that's fine. I've written them down. So let's go through your bail conditions. So I think going through bail conditions, going through actually what happened at court, and also even if you don't have communication difficulties, being in that environment's really stressful anyway. You're not going to really be remembering what everyone's saying to you. No. Especially if it's like your first time at court. So so that's also a typical day. So we might go to court. We might also have a young person on our caseload who's got like a trial. We might go to that with them. We don't act as intermediaries, but sometimes we just go and like hand a report to the judge in person, so they know who we are.
And that would be like summarising their communication difficulties or strengths?
So just their strengths and needs and like any strategies they can use with them. So it's kind of like a visual reminder, like, hey, use some... use vocabulary that everyone can understand.
Oh, that's so important.
Yeah, definitely. And then, we do a lot of training. So I've been doing this big old project this year where I've trained, I don't know, probably every single magistrate.
Wow.
I'm trying to anyway. So we did like a big conference. So there's 150 magistrates. So we do a lot of training. We train CPS, who are the Crown Prosecution Services. We're doing a lot of training, just a lot of like upskilling staff, just a lot of attending meetings and kind of giving our input. We always try and go to each like MDT meeting. And in the Youth Justice Service, we kind of have like big kind of case discussions about young people. Yeah. And we just always make sure there's at least a speech therapist there just to give our kind of feedback. So a lot of the time.
Yes, I think I remember joining one of those in the morning when I shadowed you.
I think you did, yeah. And a lot of the time, like, obviously a lot of the needs are undiagnosed. So all the young person might have come from a different borough and we just don't have any information about them at all. Yeah. And it's just always good to kind of be that presence there. Yeah. People know.
I remember something that really stood out to me in that meeting was that actually, although a lot of them seemed to have communication needs, there were so many other needs that perhaps were more of a priority. So do you find that often speech and language therapy isn't a priority for some of the young people?
I think, we always kind of think about things, who's the right person to do the right work at the right time. So we do have quite a big health team in our service. So we've got speech and language therapists, we've got clinical, so psychologists, we've got a nurse, we've got sexual health team, we've got substance misuse as well. And it's kind of thinking, what is the biggest priority? Yeah. So a lot of the time, the young people are going through quite a lot. They've had a lot of trauma. Then for now, speech and language therapy probably isn't the biggest priority for them. And we always try and work in a very trauma-informed way. Yeah. So having like just this random woman come in and talk to them about their emotions and about their communication isn't always the best idea. But saying that, I actually think what we've currently been doing quite a lot of actually is before the young person accesses talking therapies, we might do a little block of intervention around emotional literacy and how to talk to a therapist. Yeah, which has been really nice. It's kind of been like that kind of stepping stone to accessing talking therapies. I feel it's really hard. I don't even know how I feel most of the time. I always have to look at emotions wheel and be like, okay, I feel really overwhelmed. So I don't know. I think it's really good to kind of talk to that young person about emotions, and kind of sometimes it fits in our role to talk about what the health team is, what therapy is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds like you gain quite a good relationship with the client. I don't know. I feel like that's very common in many settings with SLTs. Like I think people generally think we're very approachable, and obviously a lot of our role is actually building that rapport. So do you find that compared to the other professionals on the team?
Yeah, and I think we're really lucky because in our service, so just in terms of like our caseload, it's a lot smaller than if you're in like a mainstream primary school. We're really lucky. We've got it's very complex, of course, but a very small caseload. So we actually have the time to be really trauma informed. So we're really lucky. We get to really build a good rapport. And I think there's so much research going into like how important that is for the young person, especially in youth justice. They've never had professionals who've they felt they could trust before.
No, especially in court, you must feel like you must be quite a reassuring presence, really. Sometimes
I think so. Yeah, I think sometimes just having a little NHS badge does a lot for us.
Honestly.
People were like, oh, okay.
I feel like families are also really appreciative of us being there because in court, even if other professionals want to give the time, it's just so hectic that they don't have the time to give. Right. Yes. So it's really nice that we can kind of bridge that gap and like spend a bit of time with the family beforehand, speak to the young person, speak to, if they've come with their carer, speak to them to just let them know what's happening, that we're available. And I think just being that reassuring presence it just does so much, like it goes so far.
No, I can imagine. That's lovely. And I'm intrigued as well by the training you said you offer. So I've seen that actually in a lot of articles that they're calling for a lot more training of lawyers and magistrates. What does your training involve? Like, what do you talk about?
I've kind of developed training for magistrates, for lawyers, for Crown Prosecution Services, and it consists of me kind of talking about communication. I'll then do like an activity about what it's like to experience communication difficulty, which even I saw a police officer the other day, I hadn't seen him in about a year, and he was like, Megan, I remember that training you did, that was brilliant, that activity, when you had to draw the picture, and I was like,
that's amazing.
Yeah, exactly, so sweet. So just doing like activities to kind of put you in the perspective of a young person who's got a communication difficulty, and then we'll just kind of do a little kind of brief overview of what speech language communication needs are, how to spot them, what the strategies are.
And what sort of interventions do you use to support the young people that you see?
I guess a lot of my time is spent building rapport and building that relationship. Because if we go in immediately and we're like, all right, let's establish some goals and let's set some goals, sometimes it just kind of falls flat, or it's kind of like, I don't see the reason why I need to work on this, and I don't have any problems. And it's the beginning of my interventions is usually just getting this young person to be comfortable with sharing with me.
Yeah.
And then from what they've shared, we then make goals together.
Okay.
And so, yeah, so the first half of my intervention, I guess, which I don't know if it's like, if I can call it an intervention or if it's just the rapport building stage, is I have a PowerPoint, which is like, hello, nice to meet you, I'm Haj. So it's got pictures of me and little bits of information about me.
Oh, that's so nice.
And I feel like that I use that to introduce myself to the young people I work with. And I feel like that's a trauma-informed approach that I take because, I thought that we all take. And it's because it's like, we're about to ask this young person a bunch of questions about them.
Yes.
And they've spoken to so many adults who have asked them thousands of questions. And sometimes that can feel really alienating. So when you come in and you're like, well, hey, this is me and a bunch of things about me. And now can I ask you some questions about yourself? It's a nice model. So one of the young people I'm working with, he has limited vocabulary, but is very reluctant to do any kind of formalized type intervention.
Right.
I play word games with him. It's just a way to, like, I guess, facilitate conversation. And then within that, they'll be like, he'll ask me, what does this word mean? And then from there, we'll take it and we'll like think of the word and we'll build on that vocabulary in that way. Or it might be he will have conversations about what do you want to do in the future. And from there, it'll be something like, I'm interested in wanting to become a barber or I want to pursue music. And then we'll think about relevant vocabulary that you might want to know within that context. And then it will be in a very casual way, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So we also work on a lot of projects. Yeah, so one of the projects I've been working on is called Meet the Community. One of my young people he actually doesn't want to go ahead with the project, which is really sad. But if he did want to go ahead with it, it would be for him to meet someone within the community that's doing the profession that he's interested in. So for example,
so cool.
Wow, I love that.
It's really cool. It's like a functional type of intervention.
Yeah,
like,
Absolutely.
one of the coolest interventions I've done is when I got involved in like a restorative project.
Okay.
So I worked with a young person who has a DLD. I worked with a restorative justice worker and we created some zones visuals to help the child communicate his emotions within the restorative conversation. And we facilitated it in a space that the child was comfortable in. So we went to their school, their environment, and we used our SALT visuals for this young person to express themselves to their peers, and it ended in a group hug. Within it, he had an opportunity to express his feelings, how he felt before the incident, how he felt after the incident, what he wants for the future.
Wow.
His peers basically shared how they felt about everything that happened, and I was able to speak to using the visuals and using like Makaton sign, able to speak to this young person and be like, do you understand what they've said to you? And it was really nice because it was a lot of non-verbal communication, but it was really nice to show the other professionals how valuable non-verbal communication is and how far your conversation can go by using visuals. So
absolutely, that's great. And the restorative process, Ray, what does that mean?
So we have a restorative justice worker within the youth justice team who will be kind of like a lead, like the middle person between for the victim. Okay. And they our restorative justice worker is amazing. She will contact the victims, capture their voice, and then speak to the young people on our caseload or her caseload about the victim's voice, and we will, where possible, try to allow the victim to speak to the young offender to restore, to repair the harm, and to like kind of get some closure on the incident. And like I think where that's possible, it's so powerful.
That's
amazing.
Yeah, it's incredible.
That's so powerful. Wow.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Do you find that part of the therapy process involves changing the individual's outlook on crime?
So this is a really interesting question because I guess the purpose of a youth justice service is to stop reoffending. But I never talk about the offence.
Okay.
Or I very rarely talk about the offence. And I feel like it's one of the reasons why I wouldn't, or not that I wouldn't, but I haven't yet, is because there are so many different professionals involved, and there are many professionals who are already directly addressing it. I kind of feel like my role is more about helping this young person to advocate for themselves and to get an understanding of their communication challenges. I think naturally within conversation things come up. They'll talk about something that is related to criminal activity, and then you get to explore that idea and be like, okay, well, have you thought about it from this perspective? Or well, you mentioned to me that you want to do this in the future. Well, you need to, you won't be able to achieve that if you come back to the service. And we don't want you to come back to the service. So far in my role, I've never directly addressed it, and I think it's because you just need to wait for the right time and place. The goal is that we don't want you to reoffend. And for me, I think one of the best ways to avoid reoffending is to help you build confidence in yourself and who you are. If eventually that will lead to a better future.
And obviously building communication should also
help you, like, increase your opportunities. You have more opportunities, you have more prospects, you have better choices that you can make.
It's really interesting. It's linked actually to an article I read by Winstanley et al. I'll put the link to the article in the episode description. And they found that young offenders with DLD are more than twice as likely to reoffend than their unaffected offending peers. Kind of similarly, Meg, I wonder what your thoughts on this were, and actually how have you found the impact of speech and language therapy?
Yeah, so I think it's, the statistics are just staggering, aren't they? Like,
insane.
Why with DLD, why do you reoffend? And when you actually look into it, in my experience, it's, when you say reoffend, it could just be breaching. So you could just break the rules of your bail. So a lot of young people with DLD don't understand their bail conditions because they don't have a speech therapist there. We try and do it creatively. So I'll play like breach or no breach, where I go through deal or no deal. It's like, is staying at your girlfriend's house a breach? Yes, it is. This is why. But for them, they'll just, they'll get their bail conditions, and it will say have to stay at your address. You can't have any direct contact with the co-defendant. So maybe if they've been in say they were a robbery of another young person, and it will say no direct contact or no indirect contact, and that young person's like, okay, cool, I can't see them face to face, but I can message them on the Xbox, or I can do this, or I can Snapchat them, and it's like, no, that's indirect, but no one's ever explained what indirect means to them, right? So our job's to come in and be like, these are all the forms of direct contact. You cannot speak to them, you cannot text them, you cannot snap them, you cannot do this. And then also just some bail conditions are so different. There's some of them are you can't be out in the community unless you're with an appropriate adult. So their parent, therefore, has to be with them at all times. But a lot of our kids are in foster care, right? So they always have to have a foster carer out with them. But the foster carers are under crazy pressure. If they're in a care home, they just can't always have an appropriate adult. So then they're not going to just stay in the house all day. So they do go out, they do breach their bail, they go back to court, So I guess in those terms, a lot of if you have difficulties understanding, so a lot of the times I do my breach or no breach. That's not turn everything into a game. And I kind of do that with them and just go through every single kind of opportunity that might happen and be like, okay, is actually technically a breach? And we're always developing their emotional literacy, their communication. How does that feel that you have all of these conditions and you don't really understand them? That must I would feel really frustrated. How do you feel? I think there's that aspect, so not actually understanding what your conditions are. Then there's also, with DLD just being so vulnerable to exploitation, and there's people out there who are really, really awful adults who will, pick up on if a person doesn't have great language. They're just going to do something that they don't really understand. They might not have the consequential thinking. They want to impress their friends, or they feel kind of given into peer pressure. So, and also just really low self-esteem. If you've got really low confidence, you've got really low self-esteem. We work with so many young people with DLD who kind of feel what's the point? I'm never going to get a job. I'm just going to go to prison. All my family are in prison. Why should I try and get... Because I do quite a lot of work around CV building and building their self-esteem with that.
Okay.
But even within that, they're like, well, I don't have any GCSEs. I don't have this. I can't do this. So a lot of the time it's us, building their self-esteem and their confidence. So a lot of our young people are amazing at practical skills. I've got young people who can code, who can fix a bike in 2 seconds. They're able to chain up a bike. And I watch them, they all come in and I'm just like, wow. And they have, and just things like TikTok, social media, all these things they're really good at. So I think a lot of our role is just letting them know all of the skills they have and how great that is, and kind of advocating for them in that way. And even a lot of our young people who have DLD will have English as an additional language, but instead of saying English as an additional language, I always tell them you're bilingual. Like, this is great.
Yeah.
You know,
such a flex.
And there's so much research that shows how beneficial that is.
Exactly, yeah. And I've done that with a young person where he was, he spoke Portuguese, Spanish, and English.
Wow.
And he had DOD, but I was just saying to him, like, yeah, but you're trilingual.
Yeah.
You're fluent. And he said, what does fluent mean? I was like, it just means you're amazing. Like, be a translator, you can work for a UN, like, do anything. And that was really nice, because then we looked on, we just Googled, you know, like, what are the benefits of being bilingual, trilingual. And his little smile, I'll never forget it. He just had this, like, he was a very, like, it never really showed his emotions, but his tiny little smile of, like, oh, okay, like, I'm not a failure, I am kind of clever.
What
and then,
nice moment.
yeah, it was great. And then we're writing his CV, and then he poked trilingual. It's like, yes, you are. It's amazing. And I think just stuff like that, that's, you know, why we do it, right? Is that little smile. I was like, yes. Like, I built, exactly. And it's like, this is a young person who did not want to have a speech therapist.
Oh, wow. That's
so the fact we came
powerful.
so far, it was great,
Wow, well, I feel like you've both emphasised just how impactful an SLT can be.
Completely.
We try.
And we mentioned briefly at the beginning of the episode, but as well as all the amazing work you do within the youth justice system, there's also a huge emphasis on identifying these individuals before they get to that point. So what are the signs that someone's at risk, and what are the preventative actions that SLTs can take?
I guess one of the biggest signs is disruptive behaviour. I wonder, like, how often teachers are thinking about communication and their understanding of communication, and if that is maybe a speech and language therapist could get involved. Be thinking about any young people that are at risk of suspension, young people that are disengaging within the classroom, maybe presenting with what is being described as antisocial behaviour. Yeah. Like before you even get to offending behaviour, you've been rejected in some way. You've been rejected by your peers or your teachers. Like, I remember when I was in school, I was labelled a classic disruptor, and I didn't even know what that was. And I was like, what would I have a classic disruptor? What do you mean? Everybody laughs when I say things, like, I don't know, I thought it was funny. I mean, that's like a really baby example, but there's more extreme versions of that rejection from society. And being expelled from school is one of the first times, or potentially one of the first times, that a young person has been formally excluded. When you are removed from the space where your peers are and your community is from, this child is receiving the message that you are not wanted, how you are is not acceptable, and you need to change. And I wonder if there's some work that we could do to make environments more accepting, more inviting, more forgiving, empathetic, because by the time they end up within our service, yes, we can support them, and yes, we can do rehabilitative work, and we can hope that there's no reoffending, but I wish they weren't there to begin with. I know I banged on about rapport building, but a lot of the reason we do that is because I want this young person to feel safe, and for the longest time they haven't felt safe, and now that is projecting into their day-to-day life. And so early intervention is crucial.
Amazing. No, thank you so much. That's great.
Megan Hatch, could you tell us what your favourite part and hardest part of the role is?
Favourite part has to be the kids. The young people are incredible. I just love them so much. It's such a lovely, like, it really, I just, as that story I said earlier, just seeing like that young person smile. Last week I nearly cried. I took one of my young people to the job centre to apply for universal credit, and he's got like significant needs but has never received a diagnosis due to the trauma he's faced. Anyway, he's now 18. He can get his universal credit. And we went to the job centre, and he's just come such a long way. And anyway, we're just sat there. She told him the amount of money he's going to receive, when he's going to receive it, and he just stood up and shook her hand. And he's like, I love this story. He's so sweet, and he's just, he would have never done that like a few months ago. And the fact he just stood up, shook someone's hand, and I looked at him, and I was like, don't cry, don't embarrass yourself. And then we like got back to the office, and I was like, oh my God, you shook her hand. Like,
that's amazing.
You've developed your communication skills. But I was like, you made eye contact, and he was just so, and I think for him as well, like coming out far of like, I've obviously been helping him, I think in a really therapeutic way, something really functional, just applying for universal credit is really hard, and you have to go to all your appointments, you have to be on time, you have to like, be able to understand what people are saying to you. You have to fill out forms, which are really difficult. He can't really read or write, so I had to really help him. But I was kind of doing it in a way where I was trying to develop his independence. So, you know, we'd call them up, but I'd make him speak on the phone. And he'd just look at me like, no, you say it. You know your postcode, come on. But yeah, just like, there's so many stories like that where we just work. And obviously we can be really creative and, you know, with our interventions, like getting a job and just those kind of really functional skills, which is so hard if you've got communication skills. That's the first thing they look for on a job application. It's like good communication skills. Well, young people will see that and be like, well, I've got DLD, so I'm screwed. And just working with them, so that's really fun as well. So I think the creativity, it's just so much fun.
I think the team is the best part, and and the SALT team is, obviously I love the SALT team, but also the wider MDT, I think it's amazing. I think it's amazing how child-friendly and child-focused the youth justice team are, and how determined they are to support this young person in anything they want. Like if they're interested in something, I know caseworkers that will go above and beyond to facilitate an opportunity to get this child within. I don't know if they're interested in football, get them involved with a football club so they can have an opportunity to do things within the football team, or if they like building things, get them working within a bike shop and rebuilding bikes, and like focusing on what they're interested in. And when you are working with other professionals who are so invested in the young person, you can't help but be like just as driven and motivated. And it's like
it's MDT, isn't it? It's just so lovely to work with clinical practitioners, youth offending practitioners, nurses, education specialists, restorative justice workers, incredible. Like, everyone's just so passionate.
I love working with the kids. They are so cool. And I feel like when you have that breakthrough moment, oh my gosh, it's so good. Like after all that rapport building, it was worth it. And then, and when they're invested and they want to learn about their communication, and it's so, like, even when you get to advocate for them, even that's incredible. Like you're making a space more neuro-affirming. And I feel like we are a big part of that, like change in dynamic, and it's really rewarding. Oh yeah.
Amazing. I'm gonna write that down. Hackney Youth Justice Team. And what about the hardest bit?
As you would imagine, it can be very sad. So a lot of our young people will reoffend and they will go to prison, and you know, there's every day if I wake up on the news and see a stabbing in Hackney, straight away my heart just, I mean, it would anyway, but it's just so sad. Like a lot of the time, it's just there's a lot of violence, there's a lot of exploitation, there's a lot of modern day slavery. It's just like, it's it's very sad. And just when the young people, like, you know, sometimes they do reoffend and they don't go back to school. And when they turn 18 and they're like off to probation, you're like, oh great, I'm never going to see them again. Like what? And I still think now, like, how is this kid? Like, what are they up to? What are they doing? And they're probably 21 now. It's mad. Just like, you know.
Yeah, it's hard not to get emotionally invested.
Oh yeah.
So I think that's definitely
I have no
big
boundaries
challenge
as well. I cannot set boundaries. So
I mean, we're human. Like you're naturally, like, you're invested in this young person you're working with. No, I would agree with you. I feel like, I guess, a more logistic side, what can be difficult is that sometimes young people don't want to engage, and that can be not frustrating, but it can be a bit disheartening, because you're like, I know I can help you, and I know I can, even if it's just like just getting an assessment to get a report in, like that would be so useful for you, but you're stopped at that beginning, like right in the beginning, because they don't want the input. So sometimes that can be a little bit hard, because you're like, oh, I really want to work with you. It's hard not to be passionate about wanting to advocate and wanting to like be that middle person that can just kind of talk about the stuff that other people might not think is important. Oh, it's not important. Okay, they've got ADHD, and okay, they've got autism, they've got social communication difficulties, but they still need to attend this really difficult court environment, and we're not going to adjust our language. And it's like, nope, you have to make it, you have to give regular breaks, you have to do this stuff. And it's such a privilege to be able to be in that position to make those recommendations. It feels a bit like, when you miss that opportunity. But
no, we can see it's so refreshing to see how passionate you are about supporting these young people, and it's just lovely. It's lovely to hear.
Definitely.
On a slightly lighter note, we'd love to ask you as our final question, what is your best piece of advice for SLT students who are interested in a career in youth justice?
Oh my God, listen to this podcast.
I'm like Hackney.
Yeah, we love that. Promote the podcast all you want.
My piece of advice would be go for it. Just go for it. Apply for the role if it comes up. Like, even if you feel, because I remember when I applied for the role, I was like, have I got enough experience? Can I do this? But I just did it, and I'm so glad I did. It was the best decision I made. So if you are interested in working in youth justice, I would say build your experience working with teenagers, so in secondary schools, even like maybe working in like SEMH schools, do some reading on SEMH, ADHD, and
Amazing.
I think even if like you've gone into working with adults and you think actually like the justice system is really interesting to me, there's so many jobs I see coming up in prisons all the time as well.
Oh,
and just
really?
Like, loads. And just I don't know, I get a lot of people kind of ask me like, oh, I'm really interested in youth justice, like what can I do? And I just think, just come and shadow, like we're really nice, like just come in, like ask us, and
would
like
recommend.
Exactly. So I think if you are interested, just as Has said, get experience in secondary, SCMH, and also just, if you do get to an interview, like any experience, even if you've just got early years and primary years experience, you can still use, it's all transferable skills, right? You're still being like non-judgmental with the parents. I'm sure even if like you've come from early years or like a completely different setting, you can still use a lot of the skills. It's basically we've basically made a career out of being really kind and really patient people. So do you know what I mean? Like, how great is that?
100%. Don't underestimate what you know, because you know. You know.
Okay. And like the most important thing is that like it doesn't matter if like you did really well at uni and like you've got all the grades. Yeah. I'm proof that I don't need a maths GCSE. No, joking. But like
go Meg.
As long as I think you're really passionate.
Thank you so much. Honestly, it's been so helpful. Like you said, it's difficult to get a placement in youth justice, and everyone always wants one. And I'm very
insider. Yes, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having us.
So great to have you with us. It's been so interesting and also so fun.
Oh my gosh, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope you found it as interesting as we did.
And we'll make sure to include the articles that we discussed in the episode description if you want to know more.
See you next time.
Bye.